Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this workshop. My name is Ahmed Elgammal. I am a professor at Rutgers University Computer Science. I am the director of the Art and Artificial Intelligence Lab at Rutgers. And today I'm going to be talking about art and AI and some of the ethical issues related to that. So let me start sharing my screen here. All right, so how art is being made today using AI and some of the ethical issues and the questions that raises from that is mainly my topic. The use of AI in making art is not new. It's as old as AI itself. Some of the pioneering example of using AI in making art is artist Harold Cohen, who have been using AI a lot in making his art. Artist Lillian Schwartz, a computer graphics pioneer, who also experimented with using AI in making art. This is an example of art made by Harold. And obviously the kind of AI that was used at the time is very different from the AI today. It was mainly rule-based systems with a lot of exploration of what randomness can do as part of art making. Moving forward to the last 5-6 years, we have seen a lot of progress in using AI in making art and explosion of using AI in making art. We have seen things like style transfer becoming very popular, things like Google Deep Dream, Gans, and their usage by different artists. Things like variation of GANs, like some of the stuff we have created. So through these years have been a lot of social debate and social validation of art and AI. So many exhibitions and many events involved art made by AI. We have shown our art made in the lab in an exhibition back in October 2017. Our artist called ICANN, AI artist, Christy made a sale of an art piece made by a group called Obvious back in October 2018, which grabbed a significant prize. We made an exhibition in Scope Miami Beach Art Fair in conjunction with Art Basel back in 2018, and other exhibitions in New York in some galleries. Sotheby has their auctions of AI art back in 2019. The Barbican Center in London in the summer of 2019 has an exhibition with different AI artists that showcase this technology. In the same year, the National Museum of China in November 2019 made an exhibition of AI and technology, including several pieces by AI art and artists. Besides a lot of media coverage, obviously, over the years about this hot area. So the main question that I would like to talk about today is the issue of artist identity in making AI art. What is the role of artists? Basically, how the identity of artists themselves can come through when using the same AI tools. Everybody using the same AI tools, more or less. So how can we claim that artist identity is kept? Most AI tools come pre-trained and reloaded with tens of thousands of images and videos with biases built into how these images were selected. So a question would be, how can the same AI be used by different artists, yet their soul and artistic personality can shine through the layers of biases existing in the data used in training such AI? And these are very fundamental questions because understanding the issue of artist identity is really fundamental to accepting AI as an art medium. The same issue actually appeared before, more than 100 years ago in the late 19th century, when photography tried to find its way as an art medium. There was a famous French court case in 1861, 1862, where Mayer and Pearson, who are photographers, find that somebody actually infringing their copyrights and creating copies of their work. So they went to the court to enforce their copyright, and they were surprised that basically photography is not considered as an art and cannot be protected by copyright. So they have to go through a famous lawsuit to establish basically that photography is an art. That was a fundamental question: is photography an art? And for the same reason why AI is problematic today in terms of should be considered art or not, the use of AI. So as I'm here quoting from Aaron Sharf from his book Art and Photography, for photography to be considered an art, it became necessary to settle the question of whether or not it was possible for a photographer to manipulate his medium in the way a painter could do his work on his medium. So the same question actually applies today. If you just remove photography and put AI, the same question applies, and it's a very, very important question. So really, what is the role of artists in the creative process of making art using AI? Or the other way around, what is the role of AI in the creative process of artists using AI tools today? So we can break this down into the basic component here. So as an artist, you have an AI model, most likely it's a black box for you. You feed it some inputs, whatever the inputs are. So you have control over the inputs to that black box. You might have control of some of the parameters of the AI model. And the AI model will generate some images, usually a lot of images, and you post-curate this collection. So this is more or less the process that's being used in making art using AI. So AI is a black box. You are curating the inputs, you are tweaking, you are post-curating the output. So let's see this process, how it evolved in different models of AI art making, and how the creativity process can be different. So if you start by models like Google Deep Dream, which I call it hallucination-based models, it's very popular. People have tried a lot. So basically, you upload an image and you see this hallucination of cats and dogs and other characters in the generation. So kind of a stylization based on this hallucination. Similarly, things like style transfer, where you upload your photo and stylize it using any of your favorite artist style. So in these models, basically, you see that the input here is simply a photo, and most of the time it's not even your photo. Tweaking the model almost doesn't exist. There are very little you can do about tweaking the model other than selecting what style you apply. Most of the creativity comes here, basically, which is the AI will create multiple images and you're choosing one of them. So it's a post curation. So most of the creative process here really go down to just picking up what's your favorite thing. Definitely, that's an interesting model, but most serious artists will not like that. I mean, that's maybe something that's for everybody's everyday's use, but not for serious artists. Then came Gans, and Gans really make a revolution on how art is made using AI. We all here know how Gans works, I don't have to go through that. But basically, let's think about Gans and what it brings out to the process. From the first time, from the first basically month after Gans came around, some artists take notice and start playing around with it. So the question was basically, if I feed Gans some artistic images, what it will do exactly. It's basically, it's going to emulate this art and creating more of the same thing. That's what Gans is made for. So, and indeed, I mean, this is a paper from back in 2017 where it's called GanGo, where they feed it still lifes and portraits and things like that, and generating variation of that. So what kind of results Gans were generating and why it was interesting? So here, for example, if you feed Gans portraits, classical portraits, this is the kind of outcome a typical Gans of the time will generate. As you see, it's very deformed portraits. That very much reminds us of Francis Bacon portraits here, with a fundamental difference. Is that basically here, Francis Bacon has the intention of making the portraits deformed like that. That's his intention. While here, Gans creating these portraits in a deformed way simply because it fails to generate the portrait with the quality as the input. So here, actually, the aesthetics is really coming from the machine failure rather than machine learning. So it's machine actually failing to make a correct portrait, and out of that comes that very interesting aesthetics that artists liked very much. Because the fundamental thing about art is really the kind of surprise you as an artist built into your work to surprise the viewer. However, we all know that since then, Gans have evolved a lot into generating photorealistic images that we have seen from the early style Gans and early work on text to image till all the way to today with DALL-E 2 and other things, creating very good photorealistic results. So let's now look at the GAN process and what is the creative process here and how arts are involved. And actually, I find using GANs in making art is the most involved creative process for artists. And I have been talking to many artists. I'm going to explain some of that today. So as a GAN user, basically, you feed it images. So you curate, actually curate the input here, choose what you want to put. You're putting flowers, you're putting faces, you're putting whatever you want. You tweaking the algorithm, you decide the learning rate, the how many iteration, whatever knobs you can play around here, and definitely curate the outputs. So it's really here, it's a process that really involves artists all over the place. From the point you start putting the input, choosing which GAN you're going to use, curating the output. It's a creative process, and AI is a tool in this process that really generate more of what you're doing. But with that came a lot of issues. So one of the famous issue basically was after that portrait was sold by Christie in 2019, 2018, sorry, came an issue that basically a previous artist who actually used similar model, creating similar portraits, came around and say, okay, I did this first, Robbie Barrett, basically. So he said basically that this kind of model is the model I trained based on my images that I collected, and these are the kind of images, and that group is just basically clicking a button and creating a new one. And that was a debate about that. This is an article that I wrote an Artsy about this issue before. So that's really raising the issue, who owns the work? If you're using the same model, trained with the same data, and you're just getting the next image, who owns the work? Is the person who program it, the person who created the images, or who exactly owns the work? And the funny thing is that basically, more than a year earlier, we have shown similar examples in one of our works, the CAN paper, where actually we showed this as failure cases, basically, of how GAN fails to create portraits. So another kind of GANs that becomes very popular in making art is actually things like big GANs, where the model is already pre-trained, and your role as an artist is just mix different vectors in the latent space to generate new images. So you can start mixing the vector for that dog with the vector for that other thing, and start mixing them and creating interesting stuff. So there was a project called GAN Breeder by Joel Simon, which was very popular at the time. And here, if you think about these kind of pre-trained GAN models, the creative process here is quite simple, because the artists here have no control other than mining this latent space, mixing up interesting vectors to generate an output image. So the creative process here is really simplified. I have no control over what is the input or what is the model. Everything is pre-trained. I am just basically mining from that by mixing latent vectors. And that led to many problems. One of the famous problems that happens, basically, there was that work that was created by an artist. Her name is Daniel Baskin, and in the US, and in China, the other side of the world, basically, this very similar artwork was commissioned to be painted on canvas. And now is a problem, because now you are using the same model, generating the same image. But is it by accident or coincidence, or there is some deliberate copying here? So all these actually are issues raised by this fact that they are using a model that's pre-trained and you're just mining from it. So who owns that, and how can I make my art different from others? So and nowadays come basically the DALL-E models. We have seen the progress from DALL-E 1 to DALL-E 2, and this amazing result that DALL-E 2 can generate. But if you look at DALL-E 2, really, everything is pre-trained, everything is done. So as an artist, your input is mainly the text prompts. And to create an amazing image like that or like that, it's all the creative process all comes down to the creative text. Here you're putting a text, an espresso machine that makes coffee from human soul. All right, that's really a creative text. So really, I think if you are good with text here, you can generate a good, amazing result with these tools here. So the creative process here really comes down to what text prompt you put. Everything after that is done for you. Besides, obviously, which image you're going to pick out of the many things you made. And frankly, talking to serious artists, these are novelty. We would like to try it out, but it's not really what artists want, because what artists want to be more control. So going back to our question about artist identity, so does the use of AI reloaded with content reduces the role of artists to curation and playing around with knobs, which although deceivingly allows artists to mine through an apparently infinite choices, fundamentally limit expressing their identity. So this is both a statement and question mark. But that actually bring us back to 100-year-old debates when Marcel Duchamp basically made his sculpture, and this debate about ready-made art came to the surface and never settled. So now we are basically coming back to this question. Let's now switch to what artists want to do with AI art. So we have seen the uncanny look that early Gans have made, and basically a photorealistic look that Gans they can make. And in between that, you can go through illustration kind of generation that you can get. So in this spectrum of uncanny to photorealistic comes a lot of interesting things. Some artists will prefer this uncanny look. That's what they're looking for. Some other artists prefer this if you are a designer or creating illustration. So depending on what kind of creative process you are making, you can prefer some point along this spectrum of photorealism that you can generate with these AI models. So these are interesting questions that I want to dig into a little bit. So what artists can do with AI, how artists can use AI, with artists use AI in as part of their work, why and why not? What is the artist's role in the process? We talked about that. What is the AI role in the process? How will they integrate AI into their process? How will they integrate AI into their medium? And what artists think about AI after using it? So these are the fundamental questions that I have been studying for the last few years, and I show some examples. So the first thing we need to understand is that AI is not accessible to artists in general. Most available AI models are not designed for artists or for art generation. Things like even like models like DALL-E and other models came from big corporate with the goal of promoting research, not with the goal of really fitting artist need. There is huge barriers for artists. Basically, most artists doesn't know how to navigate the everyday AI jargon that we all talking about, like training and learning and data sets and generator and discriminator and diffusion model, all these things. How to navigate through new advances that comes every day. So every single day there is new advances, new GANs coming around, new models, diffusion models. So how to navigate through that? How to get access to GPUs? As you know, it requires a lot of computation power to run these kind of models. How to you need to know how to code, or how to run a code, or how to download a code and set up environments to really work with this code. That's very challenging. So if you go to GitHub, for example, this is a screenshot from a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and just write GAN, you're gonna find there are more than 40,000 now variation of GANs available, codes available. Yes, codes are open source, but how can you even start as an artist? Imagine yourself an artist, not a programmer. How can you use that in your work? For this reason, we created a platform called Playform to enable artists to have access to this technology without having to deal with all these problems. So basically, it's a no-code platform. And really, I spend a lot of time with artists and try to understand how they use it in their work. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So basically here, I'm going to show some examples of how artists use AI in making their art, what kind of process they have used. So here, for example, a work by Devin Garakhanian, an artist from LA, who want to create a mural for Charlie Chaplin. So he used some sort of a process similar to Cycle Gan to create this abstracted surreal look out of Charlie Chaplin portraits. And at the end, he printed that in some in aluminum, basically, and sold them or put them for sale. Another process, another artist, Marco Santini, basically uses this kind of style transfer process to stylize basically his art, his photograph using his own artistic style. So now many of these artists find that style transfer is a way to use AI to massively generate lots of generation in their own style. So basically the AI now is working for you to stylize works for you based on your own style. At the end, he printed that and painted over. You can see here, he used a marker to paint over that final outcome. You can see here how it's becoming a mixed media kind of art. Here's a very interesting example. This artist, Anne Spalter from New York, who actually used AI to create some GAN generation, but at the end, she painted this work on canvas. So that's an interesting thing because she likes the outcome very much, but because AI would generate very small images, 6 by 256 or 512 by 512, it's very small. She actually had to paint them on canvas. So here the artist is using AI as an ideation step. Interestingly, Anne Spalter is a digital artist for herself, and she had been doing digital art for a long time. The fact that she come back to use the paint and brush and canvas based on AI is really interesting to me. Some of her work here that's done using AI and painted on canvas. She even do sculpture using AI generation. All that actually from one GAN process. Here's another interesting example. Artist Kenza Najm, who put actually as an input to this AI process her own artwork, and the AI generating lots of new ideas of how to mix this up. And basically, the way she described this is that the AI has its own eye on how it looks at the work and interpret it in a totally non-human way. And that's basically something she likes very much. And some of this work end up in the National Museum of China exhibition that I mentioned earlier. Here's another example, artist Carla Ganes, who used AI to generate a lot of visual assets that she used to make virtual environments. So here, every texture map, this canvas is animated. It's a virtual environment, there's an avatar here. I'm not gonna run the video, but everything in this virtual environment is created by AI. So these are just some examples of how artists have been using AI as part of bigger projects, and AI becoming a tool essential to their process. So recently you had a paper where we surveyed some of these artists to understand what do they think about AI and how it helped them. So the paper is in collaboration with Professor Marianne Mazzoni from Art History at College of Charleston. It was published 2 years ago. So I'm going to conclude basically with some of the quotes from that paper. So basically, artists understand AI as a major impetus to their own creative process in allowing them to generate lots of imagery very quickly and suggesting new paths of manipulation and disruption of data to create images. For them, it's a vital step in leading them to seeing their own work differently. Artists describing the relationship as a partnership, believing there is a real value and potential in pursuing that model of partnership with the machine. The biggest gain they find are to be found in the creative inspiration and the creative volume. So artists really like AI because it inspired them, it gave them a new idea, but also it allowed them to create things very fast in a very big scale. Finally, our relationship, this is how I'll conclude this talk, our relationship to computational system as human being is only going to become more critical, and that artists need to understand that relationship, be involved in it, develop a literacy and hopefully shaping this relationship. That's basically the conclusion of that paper and the conclusion of this talk. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please contact me. Apology for not being able to be with you today, but please reach me if you have any questions. Thank you very much.